This is the 5-minute podcast review for Friday, November 25, 2016. At least that's the date here in Australia as this podcast goes up. If you've downloaded it straight away in the US, it may still be Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving to US listeners. Well, if you're an insomniac like I am, this first podcast may help. It's called Sleep With Me, and it's a collection of hundreds of so-called bedtime stories that host Andrew Ackerman describes as just interesting enough for you to forget your problems, but boring enough to put you to sleep. He also describes it as the podcast sheep listen to when they get tired of counting themselves. And I have to say, it worked on me. And I think a big part of it was also Andrew's voice, which drones on monotonously while he meanders all over the place with whatever story he's supposed to be telling. Here's a sample from the episode that describes the full opening ceremony of the Rio Olympics.
And they cut to Bulgaria is next. Bulgarians have a dark red blazer and a big smile and kisses from their athlete could handle. She just handled the flag. She's handling it with one hand. So this tells me that some people are better at bearing flags than others. They have some smooth hats, the Bulgarians do. Some blue, some a tan color.
Okay, well, we'll leave the Bulgarians and the Sleep With Me podcast right there and move on to the second podcast this week, which is appropriately called Waking Up. In fact, the full title is Waking Up with Sam Harris. So this is actually quite a heavy podcast series if you haven't heard it. Sam Harris is a neuroscientist and philosopher and goes way deep on a range of subjects. Often they're controversial ones like gun control or religion, particularly Islam. Sam himself is an atheist. But no matter what your position on any of these subjects, this is a good podcast series if you want to have your views challenged, which I think is a good thing for any of us. Definitely, I think an outtake from listening to the Waking Up podcast is the recognition that most issues are far more complex and nuanced than the convenient, easy, black and white positions many of us take. So if you want to try one episode, I'd suggest episode 19, called The Riddle of the Gun, which is focused on the issue of gun control in the US. Now, I'm not going to say it will change your overall position on gun control, whatever your position may be, assuming you even have one, but I think there's a pretty good chance it will at least challenge your views and maybe refine your position. And you could say the same thing about many of the other issues covered across the Waking Up episodes. So check out Waking Up with Sam Harris if you're looking for a podcast that will give your mind a bit of an intellectual workout. Staying with the mind and on to podcast number 3, which is Two Guys on Your Head, a much lighter podcast series, each episode only running 7 minutes or so, and each episode deals with a different and interesting aspect of human psychology. The title, Two Guys on Your Head, refers to the two co-hosts, both doctors of psychology, and the types of subjects they cover include IQ tests, procrastination, what's going on in your head when you sleep, why being on hold is so frustrating, and even a recent episode dealing with the psychological reactions to the US election. There's over 150 episode topics to choose from at the moment, or at just 7 minutes each you could binge on them all. So that's Two Guys on Your Head. Speaking of the US election brings me to the last two podcasts for this week. Podcast number 4 is called No Filter. This is an Australian-based interview podcast series hosted by journalist Mia Friedman. So Mia is a self-described centre-leftist, and so are many, if not all, of her interviewees. And like many people around the world, Mia was completely blindsided by the election of Donald Trump. She decided she'd definitely been living in a bubble and needed to get out of it. So here's what she did.
Hi, I'm Mia Friedman, and welcome to a special 4-part post-election bubble burst mini-series of No Filter, where I get out of my bubble and talk to people I know who think differently to me, sometimes very differently. Sometimes so differently, I've been known to shout loudly while watching them speaking on TV or reading their words online. But I'm not sure shouting or name-calling has got us very far, so I thought, after the election, I'd try calling them up and having a chat instead.
And that's what Mia did, and the result is 4 interesting episodes of the No Filter podcast called Mia Bursts Her Bubble. Sticking with the US election and onto the last podcast for this episode, which is The Documentary. This is a great BBC podcast that drops the best of BBC audio documentaries into the feed, and they cover a wide range of subjects. But again, I want to highlight a series of 4 podcasts within the documentary feed. The series is called America Revisited. It covers a road trip BBC journalists made across the US to interview ordinary Americans in the lead up to the recent US election. It's called America Revisited because the trip retraces a similar one made back in 2008 during the lead up to the election that put Barack Obama in the White House. The idea was to get past the media commentary and gauge how, quote, real Americans were feeling in the lead up to this month's election. Here's a clip which was actually recorded at a shooting range, so you'll hear the occasional gunshot.
When I raise President Obama's emotional pleas for gun control, there is a long, uncomfortable pause before this.
He's like a scared puppy, and he turns around and he runs and he hides behind his own Muslim rules. No, sorry. I can't trust him.
What has changed in the last 8 years, couple of years? What has changed?
A lot of what's changed is Muslim extremists.
It's too easy for them to get into this country through illegals and even Muslims. I mean, if you look at a Mexican man and he's got his little mustache and whatever, I mean, skin tone, color, and everything, they're similar to some of the Middle Eastern men. So it's easy for them to pass as Mexicans, possibly. It's just easy for them to get into this country.
And do you think there's more dangerous people coming over than there would have been, say, 8 years ago?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Definitely. Make them build the wall between Arizona and Mexico.
And I think we should tighten that.
There's your cheap labor.
As commander-in-chief, he should be sending bombs over there like people eat M&M candy. What has he done about ISIS? Send them out.
Am I angry? Yeah. Am I scared? Absolutely.
Will we defend this country?
Absolutely.
100%.
Should they take our guns away? No. Because what do we have left when these people, and I use that loosely, start coming in here?
So, that's just one clip out of what was nearly 4 hours of interviews across 4 episodes. But it does play to the key question raised by the series, which was, why do Americans seem more divided than ever? And of course, it and many of the other interviews take on a whole new prophetic dimension given the outcome of the election, which shocks so many, not only in the US, but around the world. If you want to listen to the series, search out the documentary podcast and look for the 4 episodes in the America Revisited series. Well, that's it. 5 podcasts in around 5 minutes, and I'll be back next week with 5 more, but I promise I'll give the politics a rest. Links to all the podcasts mentioned in this episode should be on your screen, as well as an email address if you want to let me know about a podcast I should cover, maybe even your own. Thanks for listening.